My name is Elena Ward, 29 years old. I wish I could say my story starts with something soft and cinematic. Sunlight on warm kitchen tiles, the smell of coffee, my parents laughing together while my older sister and I shared jokes over breakfast. It doesn't. It starts with something much more ordinary and much uglier, being the unfavorite child. For as long as I can remember, my older sister Zaina has been the star of the show in our family. She's 30 now, just a year older than me, but our parents talk about her like she was born carrying a halo. If you only listened to them, you'd think the sun rose when she woke up and set when she got tired. Zaina knew she was the favorite. That was the worst part. She wore it like a crown. It gave her this attitude, this belief that she was above everyone else, especially me. If she pushed me, if she hit me, if she humiliated me in front of her friends, it didn't matter. Somehow, I'd be the one standing in front of my parents getting the lecture about being more understanding and not overreacting. When she shoved me into a doorframe so hard I saw stars, my dad just sighed and said, "Girls fight. Toughen up, Elena." My mom told me not to make a scene. Zaina smirked from behind them like a queen whose guard had just handled a minor uprising. The only people who ever seemed to notice how skewed things were our grandparents and a few blunt relatives. At holidays, you'd hear it slip. Why does Zaina get everything while Elena is left out? My parents hated that. Their solution wasn't to fix anything. It was to move. They packed us up and moved us about 150 miles away from the cluster of relatives who dared to question them. If we only saw family on holidays, then no one would see what life was really like for me the rest of the year. No one would ask why Zaina's smile came with gifts and mine came with excuses. At home, things got worse. Zaina's cruelty turned from childhood teasing into something sharper. She knew exactly where to hit, emotionally and physically, and she knew our parents would look away. When I tried to defend myself, I was told I was jealous and dramatic. When I got quiet, I was cold and disrespectful. There was no winning. Then came my first real boyfriend. I was so stupidly happy. He wasn't rich or brilliant or wildly special. He was just kind to me. He listened. He thought I was funny. For the first time, I saw myself reflected in someone's eyes as something other than second best. Zaina noticed. One evening, he came over for dinner. My parents were thrilled to finally have a guest that wasn't one of Zaina's friends, so of course they turned up the charm for her. She floated around the table, laughing too loudly at his jokes, leaning in too close, brushing his arm when she passed plates. I watched him shrink into his chair. Later, he told me he felt uncomfortable, that Zaina kept asking him personal questions, kept touching his shoulder, kept making little comments about how Elena gets weirdly intense sometimes. I confronted her. She rolled her eyes and said, "If your relationship can't survive a bit of conversation, maybe he's not that into you." A week later, he broke up with me. I went to my parents for support, eyes swollen, voice shaking. My mom laughed and said, "You're young. You'll get over it." My dad added, "Don't be so sensitive, Elena. There will be other guys." Not one of them asked what part Zaina had played in it. That was the pattern. Family vacations? My parents would take Zaina on trips and leave me behind with some excuse about money. "We can't afford another ticket. We'll take you next time." Next time never came. I'd spend those days at my grandparents' place, trying not to feel like luggage that had been deliberately left behind. When I turned 16, I passed my driver's test on the first try. It felt like one small win in a life where I rarely got any. I was working part-time at a fast food place, smelling like fries and grease most nights, squirreling away what I could. I asked my parents if they could help me get a used car if I paid them back slowly, like a little loan. They said no. "We just can't do that right now, Elena." A few months later, Zaina finally passed her driving test after what felt like endless failed attempts. Within days, my parents bought her a car. No questions, no repayment plan, no lectures about money. I remember standing in the driveway, watching her sit behind the wheel, shrieking with excitement, my dad grinning like he'd just given her the world. My mom cried happy tears. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, telling myself not to cry. When I turned 18, after months of pleading and being brushed off, my parents finally agreed to get me a car. I should have known there was a catch. By then, Zaina had decided hers was too old, so they gave me her old car and bought her a brand new one. I told myself to be grateful. At least I had something to drive. At least I wasn't taking the bus anymore. But there was this ache in my chest that never quite went away, the feeling that I was always being fed scraps while Zaina feasted. The double standards didn't stop there. When Zaina graduated high school, my parents treated it like she'd just won a Nobel Prize. Party, decorations, relatives invited, speeches about how proud they were. When it was my turn, my mom showed up late, even though she'd been at home all day. My dad didn't show up at all. At dinner that night, I tried to talk about how hurt I was. My dad shrugged. Graduating high school isn't a big deal, Elena. You're supposed to do that. Later, Zaina sent me a message. You do realize Mom and Dad don't love you the way they love me, right? You can stop trying so hard. That night, I cried myself to sleep and something inside me hardened. A few months later, I moved out. I packed my clothes, my books, my frustration, and left. You'd think my parents would be worried, or at least sad. Instead, it felt like they were relieved. One less expense, one less mouth, one less problem. From then on, I was just another relative, someone they saw on holidays, someone they could talk about in passing. Oh, Elena, she's doing her own thing now. I worked full-time, clawed my way through college on scholarships and cheap instant noodles. Not a single cent came from them. It was brutal, but it taught me something valuable. If I waited for my parents to invest in me, I'd die waiting. I graduated. They said the drive to my college was too far and too much hassle. I didn't bother arguing. I took the pictures, posted them, smiled my brightest smile, and quietly noted who actually showed up for me. After college, I got lucky. I landed a good job back near my hometown. The pay was solid, and for the first time, I felt like my life was not just surviving, but building toward something. I had savings, plans, a future. Meanwhile, Zaina's story went differently. She didn't finish university. Too many nights partying, too many bad decisions. My parents supported every stumble, of course. She got into day trading, buying and selling on her laptop with money our parents handed her every month. At first, she bragged nonstop about her profits. Then came the inevitable crash. One big bad trade, and all that money vanished. I expected our parents to finally wake up. They didn't. They called it a learning experience and gently nudged her toward finding a more stable job. I kept my distance. It wasn't my job to fix her life. Then my dad's manufacturing business started falling apart. He'd built it from scratch about 5 years earlier, but his manager, his right-hand person, left for a better offer, and everything started to wobble. Orders got messy, operations got chaotic. My dad was getting older, and the business was too much for him to run alone. Bankruptcy started lurking at the edges of every conversation. He didn't want to hire an outsider. He didn't want to train someone who might leave. So he did something rare. He invited just me and Zaina to lunch. No mom, no relatives, just the three of us. I remember how strange that felt. My dad didn't bother with small talk. He laid it all out. The business was in serious trouble. He needed someone he could trust to step in. When he spoke, his eyes kept drifting to Zaina. It was obvious who he wanted to rescue the family legacy. I stayed quiet. Part of me wanted to jump in and offer to help. Another part wanted to see if Zaina would finally step up for something other than herself. She didn't. She laughed, called the business too small, too risky, said leaving her current job for a shaky family company would be career suicide. She practically mocked him for asking. I watched the hurt settle into my dad's shoulders, the disappointment in his eyes, all those years of worshiping her, and she wouldn't even try. Then he turned to me. Elena, he said, voice rough, I need you. I had savings. I had a stable job. I had a life that finally didn't revolve around begging my parents to see me. And yet, something in me couldn't stand the idea of watching the business go under. Maybe it was loyalty. Maybe it was stupidity. Maybe it was the little girl inside me still hoping that if I saved them, they'd finally see my worth. After a few sleepless nights, I made my decision. I quit my job. I put my savings into the company. I walked into that factory as if I were walking into a burning building, convinced I could help put the fire out before it took everything. My parents thanked me over and over. My dad called me a lifesaver. My mom cried and hugged me like I'd just been born all over again. For the first time in my life, I felt like they truly needed me. What I didn't know then was that 5 years later, when their golden daughter wanted my seat back, they'd have no problem throwing me out of the very building I helped save. If there's one thing no one tells you about becoming the responsible one, it's this. Once people realize you can hold the weight, they stop noticing how heavy it is. When I stepped into my dad's company, the place felt like an exhausted animal on its last legs. The office walls were yellowed, the computers were ancient, the filing cabinets were more chaotic than useful. Orders were late, processes were sloppy, and the staff walked around with that quiet, bracing for impact look people get when they can tell the ship is sinking. I started small. I stayed late, going through dusty folders, creating spreadsheets, trying to understand where the money was actually going. I sat on the warehouse floor with a notebook, watching how orders came in, how they were packed, how they went out. I listened. The workers told me what used to work, what didn't, what they were too afraid to mention to my dad. Then I started changing things. We updated the website so it didn't look like it had been built when I was in middle school. I set up an online ordering system, reached out to old clients who had quietly disappeared, asked them what made them leave and what it would take to make them trust us again. I designed simple marketing emails and cringed my way through cold calls. I reorganized the inventory system so people didn't have to guess where things were. I walked through the shop floor with my hair tied back, safety boots on, tape measuring boxes, and lifting cartons alongside everyone else. Slowly, painfully, the numbers started shifting. We weren't drowning anymore. We were floating. Then, gradually, we began to move forward. My dad didn't understand half of what I was doing. Technology and he were not friends. He still printed his emails. He still asked me what a PDF was at least twice, but he liked the results. The late notices stopped coming. The bank stopped calling. Orders weren't delayed. He started introducing me to people as our operations head, or the one who actually keeps this place running. He didn't say my daughter very often, but when he did, it felt like a medal I'd been chasing my entire life. I poured 5 years into that factory. 5 years of early mornings and late nights, of carrying boxes and smoothing over upset clients, of learning just enough about ISO standards and quality management to make auditors nod approvingly instead of sigh. I knew every employee's name, their kids' ages, who needed flexible hours to take care of a sick parent. For the first time, I didn't feel like the forgotten child. I felt chosen. At home, things shifted too. My mom started bragging about me to relatives over the phone, at least when she thought I wasn't listening. Elena's the reason the business is still alive, she'd say. She's so organized, so strong. They still talked about Zaina like she was some untouchable golden statue, but for once, it wasn't at my expense. It felt like there was finally room for both of us in their pride. When my grandparents visited, they looked at me with this quiet satisfaction, like they'd been waiting my entire life for this balance to finally even out. My grandfather slapped my shoulder and said, "About time your parents see what we always saw, kid." I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, the future was simple. The business would eventually be mine to run. Not as some petty prize, but because I had earned it. And if Zaina ever wanted to join and actually work, I would share it. I held on to that thought like a small, secret promise to myself. Then Zaina dropped a bomb. 3 years ago, out of nowhere, my parents group texted me and my grandparents. "Big news! Zaina's getting married." "To who? Since when?" We had no idea she was even in a serious relationship. Then we found out she'd met him, a guy named Don, barely a month earlier. A month. I met him at a rushed family dinner. Don was charming in that easy, surface-level way some people have. Expensive watch, big laugh, lots of vague talk about projects and opportunities without ever explaining what he actually did. Zaina was infatuated. She clung to his arm, finishing his sentences, laughing too loudly at his jokes. She glowed with a kind of happiness that made me feel like an intruder just looking at it. When we were alone for a second, I tried to be careful. "Are you sure about this? It's fast. You barely know him." She rolled her eyes. "You're jealous, because you're married to the factory and I have an actual life." I wasn't jealous. I was scared for her. But I'd learned the hard way that you can't drag someone out of a fantasy they're determined to live in. They got married. My parents went all out. Lavish venue, tailored suit for Dawn, intricate dress for Zaina. It looked like a glossy magazine spread. I stood there with a tight smile, clapping when I was supposed to, feeling like the practical, sensible sister who had swapped romance for spreadsheets. After the wedding, the distance started. At first it was small things. Zaina took a while to reply to my mom's messages. Then she stopped picking up calls as often. Dawn didn't like how involved our parents were, how they expected regular visits, updates, family dinners. Soon, weeks turned into months with no visits at all. My mom would stare at her phone like it was a window to another world, willing it to light up with Zaina's name. My dad pretended not to care, but I caught him standing in the hallway some nights, phone in hand, thumb hovering over her contact before he put it away and went to bed. For nearly 2 years, Zaina might as well have disappeared from our daily lives. Then, one day, she came back like a storm front. I was at the office, getting ready for a big client meeting, one that could secure a long-term contract. My dad was supposed to attend. 10 minutes before it started, he was nowhere to be found. I called him, irritated and worried. He picked up, breathless. "Elena, something came up. We'll reschedule, okay?" "We can't reschedule," I said, pacing. "They're already on their way. Where are you?" There was a pause. Then he said almost casually, "Zaina's back. She's home. For good." The room swayed for a second. I swallowed. "And the meeting?" "Elena, we'll talk later. Come to dinner tonight. There's news." He hung up before I could answer. The meeting went on without him. I smiled, negotiated, answered questions, pretended I wasn't wondering what "for good" meant. That evening, I drove to my parents' house with a knot in my stomach. Zaina was already there, sitting at the table like she'd never been gone. She looked tired, thinner, eyes a little hollow beneath perfect makeup. My mother hovered around her, refilling her glass, touching her shoulder, tucking her hair behind her ear like she was 5 years old again. Don wasn't with her. We didn't have to ask why. Eventually, my dad told us. Don had cheated on her and left her for someone else. I sat in silence, listening as my parents clucked and tutted and cursed his name, conveniently skipping over the part where they'd worshipped the ground he walked on. I didn't say "I told you so." I didn't remind her of that conversation where I'd warned her about rushing into marriage. I just watched. My parents were radiant, and it took me a while to understand why. Yes, they were angry at Don. Yes, they were hurt for Zaina, but beneath that, there was something else: relief. Their golden daughter had come home. Later that night, after dinner, my dad asked me and Zaina to come into his home office. The room smelled like old paper and dust and cheap aftershave. He closed the door behind us and leaned against his desk, arms folded. His eyes landed on me first, and for a brief second, I thought he was going to thank me again for everything I'd done. Instead, he said, "Elena, you need to start looking for a new job." The words didn't make sense at first. They hovered in the air between us like they were meant for someone else. "I what?" I managed. "Why?" My dad cleared his throat. "We don't need you at the company anymore." Zaina's lips curved just slightly. "Starting tomorrow," he continued, "Zaina will be taking over your role." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, the joke, anything. Zaina stepped forward, all confidence. "I'm ready to step up for the family now. It's time I take my place in the business." Her place. I felt something fracture inside my chest. "I left my job to help you," I said, voice shaking. "I put my savings in. I rebuilt that company with you barely there. You can't just fire me." My dad's expression hardened. "You're just an employee, Elena. Legally, I can. And I am. I'm doing you a favor, letting you go immediately instead of making you work a notice period." I looked toward the door, hoping my mom would walk in and say this was all some misunderstanding. "She knows," my dad said quietly, reading my mind. "It was her idea too. We want Zaina to stay. This is the best way." Zaina turned to me, eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. "You didn't really think you were more than a placeholder, did you?" My throat burned. "Why can't we both work there? It's a family company. I made it profitable. There's more than enough to do." She laughed. Actually laughed. "You've always been so naive. That business was meant for me. You just kept it warm." I wanted to scream, to flip the desk, to tear the framed certificates off the wall. Instead, I heard myself say, in a voice that didn't even sound like mine, "What about the money I put in?" My dad's eyes flashed. "We gave you everything growing up. You want to nickel and dime your own parents? You should be ashamed." In that moment, 5 years of sacrifice, of sweat and hope and fragile belonging evaporated. I could see it clearly now. Nothing I did would ever outweigh the simple fact that I wasn't Zaina. I walked out of that office feeling like a ghost leaving its own body behind. Behind me, I heard my dad tell Zaina, "Don't worry, it'll all be yours someday." Someday. It was the first time he'd ever said those words out loud, and he wasn't saying them to me. I didn't cry when I walked out of my parents' house that night. Maybe my body was too stunned. Maybe I'd run out of tears. All I remember is gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white as I drove home in silence. The next morning, I woke up with a hollow ache where 5 years of purpose had lived. The sun still rose, the world still moved, but something in me felt broken. Like a door that had been slammed one too many times finally snapped off its hinges. I told myself to be calm, to think rationally. So I went back to my parents' house that afternoon. Not to beg, not to fight, just to ask for what was mine. When my dad opened the door, he looked annoyed, as if I were an unexpected salesperson. "We already talked about this," he said. I nodded. "I'm not here to discuss the job. I'm here to get my money back. The money I put into the business, my investment." Silence. Then, "You're unbelievable," my dad snapped. "All the money we spent raising you, and this is how you repay us?" Zaina walked in behind him, smirking like she'd been waiting for the next round of humiliation. "Greedy much?" she said. "You should have known you weren't getting that money back." I felt my pulse thudding in my ears. "You promised—" My dad cut me off sharply. "I'm done listening to your entitled attitude. You don't deserve a cent, and for raising your voice at your sister earlier, consider yourself cut out of the will, permanently." It was like he'd slapped me. Not because of the inheritance. I had learned long ago not to expect anything from them, but because of the coldness in his voice. "You need to leave," he said, "right now." And I did. I turned around and walked away, collapsing only when I reached my car, silent, shaking, my breath catching in my chest, like my lungs had forgotten how to work. That was the moment I realized I hadn't just lost a job. I had lost a family I never truly had to begin with. Starting over with nothing but myself. 6 months passed with no contact. 6 months of scraping myself off the ground. 6 months of rebuilding from zero. Finding a new job wasn't easy. Every interview made me feel like I was starting from scratch. Because I was. I had spent years running a company, but none of those achievements were documented with fancy titles or LinkedIn bullet points. I wasn't operations manager. I was daughter helping at the family business, which, to recruiters, might as well have been volunteer with no real experience. But I was too stubborn to give up. So I did something bold. I went to our biggest competitors. I sat in their lobbies, portfolio in hand, and told them everything. How I'd salvaged a failing factory, modernized systems, repaired relationships, rebuilt branding. I didn't talk about my family, just the work, the part that was mine. To my surprise, they were impressed, really impressed. Within weeks, I had interviews lined up, and then an offer. I still remember holding the contract in my hands, feeling like someone had finally cracked open a window in a suffocating room. The pay wasn't just good, it was validation, a recognition I had been starving for. And for the first time since everything collapsed, I let myself breathe. Slowly, life became livable again, then stable, then quietly joyful. I rented a small apartment, bought furniture piece by piece, started cooking again instead of living off takeout and vending machine snacks. I even met someone. His name was Adrian. Thoughtful, patient, a software engineer who made bad puns and good coffee. He had an ex-girlfriend he was upfront about, a long, toxic relationship he had finally escaped, which made both of us cautious, but also comforted, knowing neither of us carried romantic ghosts of the same gender. He didn't love bomb me, didn't rush, didn't compare me to anyone. For once, I wasn't competing with a sister or a shadow. He just liked me, and that was enough. When they came crawling back, it happened last week. My phone buzzed over and over again. Calls, texts, voicemails. At first, I ignored them. I assumed it was some new guilt campaign, a fresh attempt to shame me into crawling back. But they didn't stop. Eventually, curiosity won. I called them back. My mom answered before the first ring even finished. "Oh, thank God," she sobbed. "Elena, we need help. They shut the electricity off. You have to pay our bills. We don't have anyone else." "No, how are you? No, we're sorry." Just immediate begging. I froze. Then I said slowly, "Ask Zaina." Silence. Then my dad's voice came on the line, rough and shaking. "She can't help us." "Why?" I asked, though I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. It spilled out like a dam breaking. Zaina had convinced them to put almost everything, their savings, their retirement, their emergency funds, into cryptocurrency and risky day trading. She told them it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. She promised she'd make them rich. Instead, a scam wiped them out. Then the market crashed. Everything vanished. As if that wasn't enough, Zaina was running the business into the ground. She couldn't manage employees, had already lost several major contracts. The company's financials were crumbling. My parents were broke, their business on the brink of collapse, their golden daughter completely incapable of saving them. And suddenly, they remembered I existed, not as a daughter, not as a human being, but as a wallet, a bailout, a last resort. Something inside me snapped, not loudly, quietly, like the soft click of a lock turning the other direction. I stayed calm, too calm. I'm not helping you, I said. You fired me. You replaced me. You refused to repay the money I invested. You cut me out of the will. You humiliated me. You don't get to ask me for anything now. My mom burst into tears. My dad lost his temper. They accused me of being ungrateful, heartless, a bad daughter. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I simply said, if you contact me again asking for money, I will take legal action to recover every penny I invested, including forcing the sale of your house if necessary. Do not reach out to me again. And I hung up. That call should have destroyed me, but instead, I felt a strange, fierce peace. The kind people talk about after storms. When I took back my story. But of course, my family didn't stop at calling me. They started telling relatives I was abandoning them in their time of need, that I was cold, selfish, cruel, that Zaina was the responsible one, the devoted daughter, doing her best to save the business. They turned themselves into martyrs, and me into the villain. Relatives bombarded me with messages, guilt-tripping, lecturing, begging me to do the right thing. I stayed silent for a while. Then, something sparked, a courage I didn't know I had. I opened my laptop, typed a single email, addressed it to every aunt, uncle, cousin, and distant relative who had chimed in. In that email, I told the truth, all of it. The favoritism, the neglect, the sacrifices I made, the years I kept the business alive, the firing, the unpaid investment, the cruelty, the betrayal, the new demand for money. And I hit send. For a moment after, I felt like I might throw up. Then, relief washed over me like a wave. Not everyone responded. Not everyone believed me. But many did. Some apologized. Some were horrified. Some confronted my parents directly. One uncle tried to scold me, calling me immature. I blocked him without a second thought. For the first time in my life, I chose me over pleasing anyone else. The life I deserve. 3 more months passed. I started therapy. It helped more than I expected. Helped me unlearn the belief that I had to earn love by sacrificing myself. Work was thriving. Adrian was steady and supportive. My grandparents were my anchor, reminding me what family should feel like. And me? I was learning how to breathe again. How to live a life that wasn't built around chasing someone else's approval. People sometimes ask if I feel guilty, if I regret not rescuing my parents, if I ever wonder whether I should have forgiven them. Here's the truth. You can love someone and still choose not to let them hurt you anymore. So am I the villain for protecting my peace? Maybe to them.